Good morning, and welcome to the First Existentialist Congregation of Atlanta. We are a philosophically based spiritual community founded on existential philosophy and guided by feminist principles and dedicated to human liberation and the protection of the natural world. My name is Patton White, and I will be facilitating this morning's celebration of life. We make our spiritual home in the Old Stone Church, which was hand-built 100 years ago by the African American Antioch East Baptist Church. We honor their labors of love and the powerful history of this special place. We acknowledge that our spiritual home stands on land forcibly taken from the Muskogee Creek people. We support justice and equality for all indigenous people. This morning's opening words were inspired, me finding these words were inspired by the title of Anthony's talk and how it mentions belonging. And so I found this poem entitled The House of Belonging by David Whyte, and White in this case is actually spelled W-H-Y-T-E, so obviously no relation to me. The House of Belonging. I awoke this morning in the gold light, turning this way and that, thinking for a moment it was one day like any other. But the veil had gone from my darkened heart, and I thought it must have been the quiet candlelight that filled my room. It must have been the first easy rhythm with which I breathed myself to sleep. It must have been the prayer I said speaking to the otherness of the night. And I thought, this is the good day you could meet your love. This is the gray day someone close to you could die. This is the day you realize how easily the thread is broken between this world and the next. And I found myself sitting up in the quiet pathway of life, the tawny, close-grained cedar burning round me like fire, and all the angels of this housely heaven ascending through the first roof of light the sun has made. This is the bright home in which I live. This is where I ask my friends to come. This is where I want to love all the things it has taken me so long to learn to love. This is the temple of my adult aloneness, and I belong to that aloneness as I belong to my life. There is no house like the house of belonging. This morning we have a nice little treat of music from Aviva and one of our familiar tunes from the first E-songbook, and that is What a World There Can Be. So please rise in body or spirit as you are willing and able to join in singing What a World There Can Be.
Okay, I believe this is page 6 in your songbooks. What a World There Can Be. It's from a Hebrew song, Bishana Haba'ah, and the music is by Nurit Hirsch. So, you ready? Here we go. It's got 2 verses. Soon the day will arrive when we can be together, and no longer will we live in fear. And the children will smile without wondering whether on that day dark new clouds will appear. Wait and see what a world there can be if we share, if we care, you and me. Wait and see what a world there can be if we share, if we care, you and me. We have dreamed, we have died to make a bright tomorrow, and our vision remains in our hearts. Now the torch must be passed with hope and not in sorrow, and I'll promise to make a new start. Wait and see what a world there can be if we share, if we care, you and me. Wait and see what a world there can be if we share, if we care, you and me.
Thank you so much, Aviva. Always lovely. Anthony Knight is the president and CEO of the Baton Foundation, a Georgia nonprofit organization that serves the emotional, intellectual, and cultural needs of Black boys in grades 5 through 9. Before founding the foundation, Mr. Knight worked for 22 years as a museum educator and consultant. Mr. Knight has extensive experience with and interest in African American history and culture, public and living history, informal education, and Black youth. Mr. Knight's work with the Baton Foundation reflects his ongoing interest in the issues and practices related to the collecting, preservation, and interpretation of information about and material culture from the African diaspora. Mr. Knight's undergraduate work with it was in Spanish and English at Ohio Wesleyan University, and his graduate work was in museum education at the George Washington University. Mr. Knight also holds a degree in Spanish to English translation from the Núcleo de Estudios Lingüísticos y Sociales, Caracas, Venezuela. Mr. Knight is a New York City native. So please join me in welcoming Anthony Knight.
Good morning, First E family. Happy New Year, and I hope you all are doing really well. Thank you, of course, for inviting me to give this first talk during Black History Month. It's always an honor to be with you, and I look forward to seeing you on Zoom after my remarks. So this talk for today I titled The Non-Americans, Thoughts on Belonging. 77 years ago, our fathers brought forth on this continent a new nation, conceived in liberty and dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal. This quote, as you may know, is taken from President Lincoln's wartime Gettysburg Address. It's one most of us know by heart. Looking back, though, I do not remember when I first heard it, although I'm sure it was in middle school. Regardless, the quote, certainly not the entire speech, is as familiar to me as the Star-Spangled Banner, the Pledge of Allegiance, and the Lord's Prayer. All similar expressions of cultural unanimity I learned early in life. Funny, but not until this moment did I reflect on how much a part of my psyche they are, how tightly they bind many of us one to the other, and how they significantly defined, even if subconsciously, my sense of self for the first 30 years or so of my life. Their grip began to loosen, however, when I moved to Washington, D.C. in 1990. In our nation's capital, my first real job was at the Smithsonian Institution, the great cultural icon. America's attic, as it's often referred to, that tries, almost in vain, to embrace and reflect the entirety of American culture. While working there, I met many mid and senior level Black museum professionals who not only exposed me to information about Black history and culture I never knew, but also they engaged me in conversations that made me question all I had learned about this country and my place in it. Funny, but had I been better able to assess our societal landscape, I might have had a clearer picture of how others viewed Blacks only 3 years earlier, when a friend of a friend challenged my citizenship while we enjoyed an afternoon coffee at a sidewalk cafe in Caracas, Venezuela in 1987. Shocked and ill-prepared to respond effectively, I naively produced my passport to validate my country of birth, an action that really haunts me to this day. Why should I, or any other Black person, feel the need to prove citizenship to anyone? I will never forget his comment, though, after he saw my passport. He said, quote, "Americans have blonde hair and blue eyes." As I think back on that experience, he probably was not convinced I was native born. Oh well, I was 26, and nothing in my upbringing had prepared me for a moment like that. Remember, we all memorized and recited or sang the same culturally binding pledges, prayers, and anthems. And while some differed across ethnic, religious, and/or cultural groups, the notion of the country being a melting pot made us feel as if we were indeed one, sort of. In his 1965 debate with William F. Buckley at Cambridge University, James Baldwin famously says, and I quote, "And at the moment you are born, since you don't know any better, it comes as a great shock around the age of 5 or 6 or 7 to discover the flag to which you've pledged allegiance, along with everybody else, has not pledged allegiance to you. It comes as a great shock to discover the country, which is your birthplace, and to which you owe your life and your identity, has not in its whole system of reality evolved a place for you." End quote. Tragically, Baldwin's words, uttered almost 3 decades ago, remain true. In ways profound and subtle, Black American sounds like an oxymoron. For many, the two simply do not go together. Or, how was it said in the famous Sesame Street song the Muppets sang, "One of those things is not like the other"? For those who pay attention to the news, we actually heard it just a couple of weeks ago. When explaining why we don't need new voting rights legislation, Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell expressed in his comments the long-held, if unspoken, belief that Blacks are not citizens. His statement, "African American voters are voting in just as high a percentage as Americans," reverberated throughout the Twitter sphere. Social media was ablaze as Blacks and their allies reminded the senator and the many others who think like him that Blacks are, in fact, Americans. And while we know Blacks are Americans and those born on this soil have always been, legally, Blacks were not citizens until July 9th, 1868, the date on which the 14th Amendment was enacted, 154 years ago. To put into context what that means, for me particularly, my great-grandparents, Alec and Mamie Adams, were born in the late 1850s. Legally, they were not citizens, just children. When the 13th Amendment ended slavery in December of 1865, they remained in a cruel type of status limbo for 3 years. And while they were perhaps too young to know or to understand what their non-citizen status meant, I'm sure their parents did. It's easy for many of us today to wonder what it might have felt like for people like my great-great-grandparents and the millions of Black people of their generation and the generations preceding it. What must it have felt like to only know a given place, to have worked your entire life in that place, yet not to be recognized by that country's government as a citizen. The word painful comes immediately to mind, but I'm sure the feelings were more varied and deeper than that. The truth is, many Black people don't have to imagine a time long ago. It's not uncommon when, in the heat of an argument with a white person, a Black person may be told to go back to your country. Of the many comments I hear that sometimes enrage me, this one is particularly galling, as no white person I have ever met has a family member who is indigenous to this land. And for while their ancestors may have helped establish the country we now refer to as the United States, like those of us descended from Africans, their forebears arrived from somewhere else. Over the years, I've observed how quickly politicians, those in the media, and talking head pundits like to trot out the same old worn-out quotes from the country's founding documents and from some of our leading thinkers, Dr. King among them. Time and again, they return to, "We are the people. All men are created equal, endowed with certain unalienable rights, the content of one's character, etc., etc., etc." The words, while poetic and intellectually lofty, do not bear out the lived realities of millions of United States citizens, Black people, who continue to bear the brunt of this country's refusal not only to reconcile its past, but to first acknowledge it existed. We are living in a time, once again, when significant effort is being put forth to erase history in the name of not wanting to anguish or hurt white children and their families. And true to this country's form, the same care and concern extended to white children are not extended to Black children, as if the realities of existing in white spaces has no effect on their psychic and emotional environments. As I get older, these words, these platitudes, ring more and more hollow and amount to nothing more than text on pieces of paper. And not unlike a good book, a short story, or quote of the day, they may capture your heart and mind in the moment, but soon they may be forgotten. Perhaps, like many before me, I've come to accept that this country's structure and moral, if one can call it that, leanings may not change in my lifetime. I do believe with all my heart that it can be different, but it may not. For my part, this stance is not one that is nihilistic or defeatist. Instead, it is based in a profound understanding of this country's history and in the ways in which I see our society making decisions now, in real time. The proverbial pendulum can swing in either direction. I'm just not sure which one it will be. For while we may not want to acknowledge as beings in this human form that we all are the same, the irrefutable fact remains: we are, regardless of religion, race, ethnicity, class, or any of the many sociocultural designations that give us earthly comfort. We all enter the same way, and we will exit in like fashion. And while I can only imagine with great vagueness what awaits us on the other side, I'm sure it will be an experience of much greater understanding, compassion, and love. A coming to terms of sort with the truth that we all belong. Thank you, and I look forward to seeing you soon.
Thank you so much, Anthony, for your words this morning. Please join us on Zoom immediately following today's broadcast, where we will have our meet and greet and discuss the topics and themes that Anthony brought up today, as well as sharing personal joys, sorrows, and concerns, as well as community announcements. You can find the link to access the Zoom meeting in the chat section of today's broadcast. Next week, we will be welcoming back Pauline Rose Clance with her talk about the annual Susan B. Anthony celebration. So we hope to see you either soon on Zoom or next week with Pauline. Until then, have a great rest of your day today, great rest of your weekend, and the coming week ahead. Bye-bye. Thank you.